Very grateful to be here. I always like to start anything I do in a format like this with a prayer. This was given to me by a friend of ours, Renee E from Florida, who some of you guys know. She's 56 years sober, just the last couple of days, and she came and did a conference at Frederick for us, and it's called the Set Aside Prayer. So if you join me, another moment of silence, and it really helps me get centered. God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about my disease and my recovery and you. Please open me up to a new experience with my disease and my recovery, and especially you. Amen. We really had a great time last night. We got back to the hotel, and Renee had said to me, man, I really don't feel like my talk had much depth and weight. And I said, Jesus, if your talk didn't have any depth and weight, I was like in the kiddie pool then. It was really a great talk. I hate to say a talk. I mean, that kind of depersonalizes it, but the message that she gave last night was incredible. And so in terms of what we're going to do today, there's been zero prep for this other than 27 years in Alcoholics Anonymous and 25 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, but we don't really have much of a formal agenda. We are going to obviously try to walk through the steps, and we're going to do a 4-step workshop. It's not going to be a 4-step lecture. That's what the notebooks are for. We're actually going to do some work. But on the way to the airport yesterday, we finally decided, hey, what are we going to talk about this weekend, and how are we going to do this? And we've both done this kind of individually and with other people, and but we've never had the opportunity to go through a whole day together with each other in this format. So we'll see how long this lasts before I get thrown out of here. I've been so blessed with just incredible people that have come before me in Alcoholics Anonymous that have dragged me down this path. I think about those early days in recovery and just what those old timers put up with, and Renee talked a little bit about our home group last night and Tom Ivester, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I had the opportunity. My sponsor lives in Nashville, and every year I go out there when we both pick up our chip together. It's around July. His anniversary is June 30th, mine's July 5th, and so we always hook up around that time. We pick up a chip together, spend the day, we go fishing and all that good stuff. And about 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, I guess, because our home group's 5 years old, 6 years ago, we were working on weekends of when to come out, and he said, this weekend in particular is not really good. Tom Ivester is going to be here all weekend, speaking at treatment centers and at different groups and stuff, so that's not really a great weekend. And I said, no, that's a really good weekend, as a matter of fact. I'm coming, and it didn't turn out to be a good weekend for him. He had some family stuff, and Tom's host for the weekend, this other guy got called off to do something at work, and so I got to drag Tom I around for 4 days and be his host. He was having some health issues, and just make sure he was in the right spot, and he really was just an incredible man, and very gracious. And if you don't know who Tom I is, I don't really promote other AA people, but if you never heard Tom I, go online and listen to one of those talks from Southern Pines, North Carolina. Is that right? Just one of AA's best, one of the most humble men I've ever met. Sober now over 50 years. And where I'm getting with this story is that in being his host for the weekend, people came from hours and hours and hours to see this guy, like I imagine they used to with Bill. I mean, we were in Nashville, and people had come from Kentucky. People had come from 6-hour drives to spend just an hour with Tom Ivester, and he is just an incredibly humble, gracious man. And this was a couple years after I had crashed and burned my life, as I described to you guys last night, and my sponsor had some tough times as well, and I made a decision that that weekend I wasn't gonna. I saw all these people that were just taking from Tom. They just, and not in a bad way. They had a question they were dying to ask him. They couldn't wait just to they wanted to be with him, and we're taking from him in the way that we do. And I wasn't going to do that. I was going to just take care of Tom that weekend. And finally, at the very end of the weekend, Saturday night, we're walking back to our rooms, and Tom, just being an all-knowing guy, and not all-knowing, but very perceptive and not thinking about himself, thinking about what's going on, he said, "What is it?" Because he knew I wanted to talk, because I had some big-time questions that had to be answered. And I said, "It's okay." He said, "No, come on in." And we went in and sat down on his bed, and I said, "Tom, after 50-something years of sobriety, people come from hours around to see you. I mean, they plan their weekends around coming to see you. And how have you not gotten your head so big that you haven't, crashed and burned and, gotten too big of an ego? Or have you? Have you gone through that? Have you crashed and burned by getting too big for your own britches in AA?" And he said, "Well, I learned a lesson about 25 years ago." And he told me the story about this old timer who he was enamored with, that he followed around, that he described as AA's best talker. And I don't know the guy's name, I don't need to know it, but this guy was a Southern auctioneer and just was a silver-tongued, just incredible speaker. And Tom loved this guy. And this guy ended up getting drunk. And Tom was devastated because Tom didn't know the difference between this guy and him and what had happened. And finally, a couple years later, at a conference, this guy showed up, just beaten, just what we do, a couple years out there, and he was done. And Tom was the Saturday night speaker. It was a couple minutes before he was going to talk, and he ran into this guy, and he dragged him out in the parking lot. He told the conference chair, like, "Look, we're starting late. I'm sorry. I have to do this," because he wanted to know what happened to this guy. And this guy said that he had made the podium his home group. And that's what had happened to him. And Tom made a decision that was never going to happen to him. And that his sponsor had told him, "Tom, don't ever go anywhere to talk. Go to serve." And that's really where our hearts are this weekend, is to serve you guys. And I say that, kind of jokingly last night, that we are not experts, and I jokingly in terms of, you guys need to lower your expectations about this weekend. But really, we really try to live our lives in, we are here to serve in whatever capacity that looks like. And I know that we will all walk away from this weekend with some type of experience that hopefully we can carry on to the next guy. And so we're going to each talk a little bit about, the first 3 steps in the next hour, and then we're going to get into the 4th step. And, for me, what my sponsor had me do what he had me do when I crashed and burned my life in sobriety was, he asked me to, like that set-aside prayer, he said, "Listen, I know you've done some good things in AA. I know you have a lot up here in AA. And I'm sure there's some awesome AA members in this room that know more than I do about the book. Will has already established this morning that he knows more about general service and the concepts and the traditions than I do." I wasn't in the car 3 minutes and I offended him about the concepts. I seem to have that gift with people. But he just said, "Look, John, just forget everything you know. I'm not going to, we're not going to drink any Kool-Aid here. I'm not going to ask you to disbelieve something. And this is what I do when I get to sponsor a guy that's been around a couple years, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I say to him, look, just forget everything you know. Let's go get a new big book. If your book's like mine, right? Every color of the rainbow been highlighted, a couple of different inks, pages torn out. And I keep this now to kind of show off to you guys that I actually read the book. I certainly could get a new one. But I'd ask him to get a new book, and let's just go through this a whole new experience. And so that's what you want to do today, right? If I go into an experience like today on the other side of the table, thinking, I just did my 4th step, I really don't, then I'm going to miss the new message. I'm going to miss the new lesson. And that's really the essence of this deal is staying open-minded, continuing to grow. And what he had me do for the 1st step was go from the very first page all the way up to we agnostics, don't go into we agnostics yet, and define myself, to underline my disease. Every time I relate it in, to underline it, highlight it, whatever you choose to do, and to see what I come up with, right? And that's what the literature tells us to do. Somewhere in working with others, I think it's around page 90, it says, give the new guy a book. then give them a couple days to look at it, right? Make sure you're in the right spot. We had a friend come down from Buffalo the other day that really gave us some insight, something I had never really thought of in that direction, because their home group's a lot like ours, really strong, 3 legacy group, and someone was complaining about the group being cliquey. And I don't know if you guys ever have people that complain about your groups being cliquey. And he said, what it dawned on him was that she, from her own admission, that she was not really an alcoholic, she was an addict, and she didn't understand the language of the heart as well in Alcoholics Anonymous as she did in another fellowship. And so that's why she didn't really feel like she fit in, and kind of consequently thought the group was cliquey. Renee would probably explain that better, but it really opened my eyes to it. And early in recovery, when I would sponsor somebody that wasn't quite sure if they were an alcoholic, but they knew they had another addiction or something, I got to confess and say, I would tell them, I'll just replace the words, where it says alcohol, just replace that for drugs. And I was really doing them a big disservice. Now, my motive was good. I wanted to help them. I knew this is the way to go. And, I'd heard somebody else repeat that, and it seemed like the right thing to do. But what I was robbing them was the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous that Bob talks about at the end of his Dr. Bob's Nightmare, right? For the first time in my life, somebody spoke my language, and that's what happened to me. When I darkened the door of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I told you, every authority figure I ever walked in front of shook their finger at me and said, John, what in the heck is wrong with you? Why do you do these things? And I didn't know. Because what I did made no logical sense. The prices I paid to have alcohol in my life the way that it was made no sense, made no logical sense. And the fact that these people of authority were asking me, why did I do these things? It completely discounted them out of my life. Like, if you're so smart, tell me. Like, I don't know. You tell me what's wrong with me. But what happened when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, you guys just talked about yourself. You talked about your own story. That's our most valuable asset, is our story. Now we have to get through this step work and clear away the records of the past so we have the right perspective on our story. I can't imagine, what my story sounded like 15 or even 20 years ago. Thank God it was never recorded. Just because, once we clear away these layers of the onion, it changes. But that's our most valuable asset, is our story. And that's why I make my guys go speak. I don't want, we get onto this, and I'm so guilty of it too, right? Especially when we get asked to go somewhere special like this, right? This is a special treat. And so we think, my ego says to me, oh, well, you have to know something special. You have to think of something brilliant to say in front of these people. Well, that's exactly the opposite, right? Like, God puts us in other people's lives to share our story. And when I allow my ego to get engaged and say, all right, well, I'm going to say these 15 brilliant things that I heard some other speaker say, or I just learned, or, I start getting in charge of that process again and pushing God out of the equation and getting in the way of his beautiful little bank shots that we all get to experience. So learning our story and finding ourselves in the big book for me was, it was just amazing doing that at 17 years, because when I got here, I knew I was an alcoholic. I had no doubt in my mind that I was an alcoholic. I knew my life was unmanageable. I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I would set out to, like I said, the principal says, come 11 straight days and we'll pass you to the next grade. Okay, I'm coming. And then forced, put with another proposition in front of me, I am powerless over the only solution I've ever known to my restless, irritable discontent. I cannot turn that down. When you give me that solution, I'm done. And so when I did this process and really dove into the book, and I read the book before then. Of course, you don't hang around for 17 years without doing some work. And but with a whole new attitude, it changed my life, because when you find yourself on 80 of 85 pages, you're in the right place, right? Like, if somebody gave you a pamphlet on diabetes that was 100 pages and you had symptoms on 95 pages, you'd be rolling up your sleeve, getting ready to shoot yourself with some insulin. But really what that process also did for me was it getting a little brainiac here, but I think it subconsciously convinced me that I had to go on with the rest of the steps. Like there was no more doubt about what I had to do and what the solution was, because it was nobody telling me. It was just one alcoholic in here, because the book of Alcoholics Anonymous is not a list of suggestions. It's not a list of, hey, this is what we think everybody ought to do. It's a report back, right? Like, after 3-4 years, they said, holy moly, we're still sober. What did we do? And they just wrote it down. There's no, and that's what the magic of our story is that when I got to that first meeting, I couldn't argue with anyone's experience. People said, man, this is what I was like. This is how I drank. This is what it did to my life. But then I came in here, and these are the struggles I had. And then I followed these absolutely idiotic suggestions that made no sense to me. And I got these incredible results that could not be quantified. As our friend Joe says, in spiritual math, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. God can get us from A to Z without going through the rest of the letters. And for me, I think that the first step is really the cycle of alcoholism is boiled down in the doctor's opinion. I'm messing up your book. And this is, I found myself a million places in the doctor's opinion, and this to me is the cycle. At the bottom of 28, on the top of 29, it's kind of in 5 or 6 different little sections. Doesn't matter how you do it. They are restless, irritable, and discontent. And that's how I am, sober without alcohol. Unless they can again experience the sense and ease and comfort which comes at once by taking their first few drinks. I can fight that restless, irritable discontent that he describes there for a couple days, a couple weeks, maybe a little bit longer. It's all really based on how bad the consequences were of my last spree, my last arrest, my last bit of trouble. Drinks they see others taking without impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire to drink again, as so many do, right? Because my brain tells me it's going to be different this time. I'm not going to drink with her tonight. I'm not going to drink the vodka tonight. I'm not going to do this. I'm only going to, somehow I'm going to moderate. My brain convinces me it's going to be different. After they succumb to the desire, again, as so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops. That's the third part, that phenomenon of craving, which is, in the doctor's opinion, mentions 4 or 5 different times, solely to the alcoholic. Right? The non-alcoholic does not have that phenomenon of craving. What I didn't know for a long time was when they talked about the phenomenon of craving, I thought they were talking about jonesing, the desire to use again, that obsession that, man, I can't wait to go get messed up tonight. I thought that was a phenomenon of craving. That's not what Dr. Silkworth is talking about. He's talking about what physically, metabolically happens in my system once I have 2. 2 = 20. It's on like Donkey Kong. I don't have a choice. I go until I run out or get caught, get arrested. The phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of the spree. That's the fun part. Emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over again unless the person can experience entire psychic change. There is very little hope of his recovery. And I can look at so many points in my life and see that. I got pulled over for DUI. I was 14 years old. I was in Ocean City, Maryland. It was a little beach town. I was with a bunch of older guys from the high school. We were down there for the weekend, no place to stay but the back of the car, but we had a trunk full of booze. My friend was passed out in no time, so I decided I should drive. He's passed out in the back seat. We're driving down Route 1, 14 years old. I get pulled over. Cop comes to the car. I'm scared to death. I was so scared that when he asked me a question, I told him the truth. He said, name and driver's license. I gave him my actual name and address. And I said, oh, well, I forgot my license. I left it back of the condo. My friends had too much to drink. I thought, it'd be the civic thing to do for me to drive. And he took down my name and address, went to the cruiser to call it in to see, I guess if the car was stolen or whatever. And during that period of time, you guys know exactly what I did. I made that deal with God, right? God, please get me out of this. I'll go right home this evening. I'm not going to go. I'm done. I'm done with this lifestyle. Ad infinitum, just pour it on. And I mean that. The cop comes back from the cruiser after 5 excruciating minutes, and he says, this is the luckiest day of your life. Get where you're going and stay there. Hits the siren and takes off. A half hour later, do you think I was headed home? No. We were on the beach at the next party that we could find. that's the cycle for me, right? I mean, based on the consequences, I can be good for a little bit, but I'm not really good at being good enough long enough. How long have I gone for? And then, so I sit down with a new guy, and after he's found these places in the book where hopefully he's found himself, to me, the alcoholic question is at the beginning of We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, we hope you've learned something of alcoholism. So that's what the purpose of this first part is. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And this is an or question, not an and question. And it's not really, there's not a question mark at the end of it, but to me it's a question. If when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control of the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. Either one of those makes you an alcoholic.
The one thing that you asked me to do, I couldn't figure out. So I know I'm in trouble now. I was trying to check us in for our flight, but I had to do it at 9:10 on the dot, and it didn't happen. So we'll be sitting near the bathroom. Okay, I'm Renee, and I'm an alcoholic. And I really, like I said, we've been asked for once you get through the work, okay, and once you've had a spiritual experience, there's something about you when you've been set free from, and you have a working knowledge of this program. Your heart is open. You've sat next to them in meetings, those people that you sit next to at a meeting, and you might be having a hard time, but when you sit down next to them, you just feel yourself like breathe, and you feel for 2 seconds or a meeting or whatever. And it starts to attract, that attraction rather than promotion. And so all of a sudden, you're being asked to talk, or you're being asked, and I kept thinking, these people, what do I have to offer? And it's almost like a reverse ego, it's like, who am I to not transmit the message that, that God is giving us as you get through these steps. And it's like, get over yourself. You're not that important. And, who are you to shut the door on God's work? And when you start living that selfless life, it's almost starts to be impossible not to answer. And the spiritual consequences you pay when you don't, when you don't answer the phone, or you forget that meeting you agreed to chair or whatever. And it's like, the first thought for me is, okay, God took care of it. The other speaker was there, and, you're not that important. But then it takes, like, I've cheated myself. Like that shift happens where, I'm the one that cheated myself out of getting a little bit closer to God. And so, when I work, I think for me now, what has changed as I go through the steps with other women in the book is that, I take the responsibility of passing this thing on very, very seriously. It's like the responsibility. Like, I don't get nervous to do this stuff anymore. I get really want to make sure that I'm explaining to you all in a very a way you can understand what can happen if you do the work. And I think that my job is to teach other women how to take other women through, like how I decide, but when I'm prayerful and meditation and things like that, to see, I'm doing some inventory on how I'm sponsoring women. Because I feel like I came into AA and have been sponsored by giants, on the shoulders of giants. Like these women, salt of the earth, and really understood the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, it just, the responsibility of that to me is humongous. And I know that it's just keeping my channel open to let God work through me. It's not like John said, like I can't like read an extra book so I get better at it. It's just removing things that are blocking me from God so that I can transmit what he needs me to share with somebody else. So, he kind of went into the black and white of some of the, what we ask a newcomer to do. What I ask my girls to do is go find themselves in those pages. But like he said, the language of the heart, I don't know about you. When I first got here, I couldn't have really understood this. I couldn't sit still long enough to really get through all those pages at one time. But I could sit in a meeting and drool and shake a little bit and pick up on, some, if someone was putting their guts out there, I could relate. The drunkalogs, like when people say from the podium, oh, well, I'm not going to tell you my drunkalog, it would be like my whole shoulders would droop down. Like I want to hear I want to hear it, because that's what I could relate to. And I still to this day believe that it's still our responsibility, to share. I mean, how else is a newcomer going to know if they belong here or not? They're sitting there thinking, no one's as bad as me. No one feels as crappy as me. No one did the things that I did. And we can, share those things in a constructive way in an open meeting to be able to hook those people, at least let them, understand that they have a place here. So my first step, was definitely through the language of the heart. There was no denying anymore. God put enough women in my life that had been where I had been and had the same experiences that I had had. And you know it when you see it. There's something that happens magic when you start talking about experience that you had, the deep, dark stuff, and their eyes like light up like, oh my God, this woman knows what I'm talking about. She knows what I'm talking about. And, someone who doesn't have that experience isn't going to be able to communicate it the same way. And so, for me, I think that, I had that year of trying not to drink, so I feel like, coming in under the lash, like the things that were happening to me as a result of my drinking that last month, I mean, dogs shouldn't live the way that stuff was going down. And I had nowhere else to go. I had tried every possible concoction, like it talks in the book. I love how it spreads it out there. I mean, switching brands, doing this, trying to, I did it all. And so I was thoroughly convinced. And I believe also with God's mercy, that's why I'm still here. I am that stubborn. I am that, I don't give up on anything. And it was like I would still be trying to find some combination to make it work. And I'd also believe that's kind of maybe why, I turned to something other than alcohol just to fix that spiritual part of what was wrong with me. And I had to have maybe that happen to understand that it was going to have to be a spiritual experience. There was nothing outside of me. There was no man, there was no job, there was no house, there was no kid, it was going to be something deep within me to tap into. And John and I, we do a lot of talk about this at home, him and I, is that, we started to understand that it wasn't going to be anything that we were going to add to our life. We've been to a zillion trillion meetings. We hear the message maybe a little differently, a little bit more, but it's the same message, And so it's like, I think I hear it differently when my space is open, that channel is open, and it hits those nerves if I've done the work to open up my heart. And, and my job is to do that. And so, when we find ourselves in the book, for a newcomer, it's going to be hearing the stories of the people. I get the rocket scientists, I get those intellectuals that really need to help, they need to pick apart the words, and I do that. We have a lot of dictionaries in our house. We have the old one from the time when this book was written, and we love that because words meant different stuff. But the bottom line is, when I put alcohol in me, I don't respond the way non-alcoholic people do. And what he was talking about the Buffalo people that came down, I'm not going to have, I have never been a heroin IV drug user. I don't know what that dark space in that person's soul is. Can I relate to a lot of it? Yeah, but I don't want to cheat that person out of getting the language of the heart from a person who's had that exact experience. And we've buried too many people. They're coming to us very young, very, very young, never even had the alcoholic experience. Could they be alcoholic? Absolutely. But they've gone right to something different, and they're not finding that peace in another fellowship, and they come to us for help. And it's like, I don't want to kill them by saying that I can relate, because I can't. And we're figuring that out in Frederick. We've got to find a place for these kids to go that probably could be alcoholic but hadn't gotten there yet, but want help. and that gets into primary purpose and traditions and all of that. And, that's a whole nother workshop. But, as far as a first step, how can I hit that with that girl if our experience isn't the same? So I think that, experience and where we come from and what we try to convince ourselves that we're not alcoholic is almost how we get them, to the point where they know that they're alcoholic, and lack of power is our dilemma. And for me, that was good news because, I knew if it was going to be anything I had to come up with, or I had to get more powerful, or I had to figure something out, I was screwed. Because I really knew that I had tried everything. And so I had to understand that lack of power, but there was one that was going to take care of it, and that was good news for me. I wasn't one of those, I can't give up that. I was very eager and ready to do that. I think that the variety that they talk about, I love the great leveler that this disease is. We don't know who you're sitting next to in a meeting. I love that. I sat next to this old guy that came in overalls, and he looked like he fell off a turnip truck. And he would have this little rag over his face because it was a smoking meeting, and he would talk at the end, and he'd always share at the end of the meeting. He goes, well, I don't know. And then he'd say the most 3 profound things you'd ever heard in your life. And then he'd say, well, I don't know. Hugh Bernard, remember? And, I thought he was like an old farmer who come down on a pickup truck, Come to find out, he was one of the most renowned, famous attorney judges, in the whole part of the county. And for me, early on, it was like, I got the great leveler thing. This disease will level us all out, okay? It doesn't matter. And that's another thing that bonds us together. So I think for me, the first step is the leveler. It's the thing that binds us together the most. We can swap unmanageability stories. We can do that in sobriety. I know that, we throw a lot around, I'm powerless over people, places, and things. And I started to really, question that, I do have power. I have power, that one is God, and he can handle all those people. He can handle all those people, places, and things. So it's not about, reminding myself that I don't have the power. It's reminding that someone else does. Someone else is in charge of those people, places, and things. And so I do have this power. I have this amazing, awesome power that, every single person I come in contact with, every single experience that I have makes me know him better. And like I said, that's why I'm different usually every time I talk or I'm asked to come share with people, because I've had, from the point that I've shared the last time, I've had some more experience. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I can, tell you that right off the bat because, my 18-year-old got his first tattoo when he turned 18 on Valentine's Day this year. He waited till wrestling was over, obviously, because it's going to hurt. So he gets his tattoo. And the way I handled it, I don't even know 6 months ago if I would have handled it as graciously as I did. I don't know if it was the last round of steps I did. I don't know if it was through the experience of losing my mother. But in the last 6 months, I know I handled it differently because of me and where I am in my life today. Because there was a time where all that household would have been upside down over what that was. And, was it because I learned that life's too short, by holding my mother when she died and the realization of that? Was it because I could inventory my son and what a great man he's turned into, and he's, not many kids get Eagle Scout, and he's going to college. I mean, what the hell does a tattoo matter? And it meant something to him, or, I don't know what it was, but I know that I had that experience where I handled it very, very differently. And so anyway, I think that's what, the first step for me is to find that place that knows that it's the spiritual, it's the physical, and it's the mental. It's all three, and make sure that those girls that I'm walking through the steps understands it's all three. If we forget to know what they all are, we're going to miss, and the foundation won't be as strong. If we forget the physical part, or we don't understand the physical part, that might be the part that comes back to hit us in the butt. I know that my thinking is off. I know that, my spirit is off because, I'm not feeling that connection, but that physical part, maybe that's where it's at. I do have one child who has the physical based on a lot of other things. There's things like, medicine affects us differently. So like Benadryl could maybe put people to sleep. Well, it speeds, we have a metabolic difference than other people. My daughter and I need a lot of Novocaine to numb our teeth. It's been proven that those kinds of things are indicators that we're not going to have the chemical makeup the same. And so I do have 1 child out of 3 that has that reverse metabolic reaction to things like that. And so, so maybe she doesn't have the spiritual or the mental, but she's got that physical, and who knows if the two are going to be enough to keep her from having that experience. But, that's up to God too. But, understanding that there's 3 parts to this disease, I think is a good thing to remind ourselves of.
Thanks, Renee. How about I talk about 2 and then you do 3 and then we'll break.
Yeah.
It's a really cool tattoo he got too. Wish I had the guts to do it. This second step, last time going through the steps in such a dramatic fashion when I did, I've been through the steps a bunch in the last 8 or 9 years. I think every time you take a new guy through the steps, you go through the steps again. We do this thing together. And as I said last night, each one of these steps to me is divine, and in the book says it too, is divinely designed to remove what's blocking me from God. And this second step was a very dramatic experience for me. The first couple times going through the steps, or the first 15 years of my sobriety, I kind of just glazed over the second step. Came to believe in power greater than ourselves could restore the same. My sponsor would say, do you believe in power greater than yourselves? Yes, I believe in power greater than myself, and off we went. Let's talk about the third step. That was about as much diving into it that we did. And I'm not pointing the fingers. It's just what happened. We agnostics, to me, and this is in hindsight, we agnostics to me for the first 15 years of my sobriety was just like chapter to the wise. Because I'm not agnostic, right? Let's go. Let's get into how it works. I need some help. Let's keep going. And what's interesting is, for a long time, I think I misquoted as chapter 2, the agnostics. And that's not what this chapter is. It's we agnostics. And I think what Bill hints out here, and I don't do that very often, but I think what Bill hints out here is we are all agnostics when we get here. A Gnostic is somebody with knowledge. An agnostic is somebody without knowledge. And that Latin root of that word is not book knowledge they're talking about. They're talking about experiential knowledge. And obviously, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not have this intimate knowledge of God. I did not have this access to this power. That power stream was broken, or else I wouldn't have wound up here, right? If I had some deep faith that was working in my life, some relationship with God, I would have stopped my drinking when it got out of control. Hey, this is a bad idea. Let's rely on this power that I already know and change it. Well, that's not what happened. You guys heard that last night. And so that we are all agnostics when we get here. We're all without this knowledge, this intimate knowledge of God, this access to the power. And that's what, to me, and Renee talked about it, a sponsor's job is. A sponsor's job is to help the new guy, the new girl, kind of develop that relationship with their God in their way. And the best way to do that is through the steps. I don't I don't believe in answering big deal questions for the guys I sponsor, right? It's like, all right, well, let's look at your spiritual conditioning together. You know, what's the prayer life like? What's the meditation like? What's, you know, working with others like? And in doing those things, they get the answers they need by accessing the power. You know, I don't want guys coming to me looking for answers because, you know, I'm no more qualified than they are. Other than I'm not in the middle of the mess. But that's, you know, the first 3 chapters, that's the purpose of that, of the book, is making sure you're in the right spot and convincing me that, all right, as Renee said, I got to find this new power. And what my sponsor pointed out to me in this chapter of We Agnostics was that the word prejudice is in here like 6 or 7 times. And they're not talking about black and white prejudice. I mean, first time he said that, he's like, you know, prejudice is in there 7 times. I'm thinking, I'm not prejudiced. I had a black sponsor for 10 years. That's how ignorant I was. And what they're talking about is old ideas, my old ideas about God. I've got to get rid of them because they obviously didn't work because I'm here. Right? By definition, they did not work. And that's not to say that your faith is no good, your belief system is no good. It's not what we're talking about at all. And that was kind of my mistake for the first while here in Alcoholics Anonymous was I thought I had to have the right belief system. And that's not what it was about for me. I found a belief system I really love. I converted the faith that Renee has. We were both Catholic. I converted it, 10 years of sobriety or something like that. And I enjoy that. But what I needed when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I still need today, was a relationship with. Desperately needed a relationship with. Because what I found short in the belief system was that, and again, these were my misconceptions, was that it was very difficult for me to gain access to that power in a belief system. Like, to me, for the first 30 years of my life, God was almost like Santa Claus. Do good, you get good. Like almost like Lady Justice with the scales up there. If something bad happened in my life, it was because the consequences of having, I deserved it. It was what goes around comes around. The whole karma thing. And I had the sponsor that said, Lord, please don't give me what I deserve. How about some mercy? And that's was certainly true for me. And in finding out how deep my prejudice and my old ideas were was crazy, because as I told you, when I crashed and burned my life, I heard this guy give this awesome 4-step talk, and I said, man, that's the missing piece. I did not do an inventory that way. That is the missing piece. Because when I shattered our life in the way that I did, we searched high and low for the cause. We went to a million therapists, maybe not a million, a couple short. It felt like a million therapists. We wound up with the priest. What was wrong with John that caused him to do this? And the frightening answer at the end of the day was untreated alcoholism. I'd gotten off the spiritual path one day at a time, and replaced that power greater than myself with worldly things that Bill talks about. Worship all other things, pomp. You guys know that part of the book. And they came up short. They're fun to chase for a while, right? Those things are fun to follow around, And what my sponsor asked me to do, what my sponsor asked me to do is not specifically called for in this book, and that's why I want to kind of caveat that. But Bill does talk about the necessity of it. On page 46, he says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach with him. All right. So twice there in one sentence, he talks about this conception. On the top of the next page, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. And later in working with others, he says the same thing. On 93, I think it is. And he's talking about carrying the message to the new guy. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual future freely. If a man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. So obviously the doorknob doesn't work anymore because that doesn't make sense. I'm more powerful than the doorknob. It's funny, one of the guys I sponsored just picked up a sponsee. He goes, I don't think I can help this guy. I said, why don't you think? He said, because he's a staunch atheist. I said, okay. I said, why don't you think? He's like, well, I'm not an atheist. And I was like, well, obviously God has put you in this guy's life to, and they just finished their second step last week, and it was an incredible experience. And it's just so funny how our mind will block us out of that stuff. But so back to the conception. That's 4 or 5 times. And then we all know the magical story, right? When Ebby comes to see Bill, I think our fellowship really held on the balance. Ebby's looking good, got the suit, smells good, looks good, knocks on Bill's door. Bill's amazed, right? Look at my old buddy. Why, how does he look so good? And I'm paraphrasing it, Ebby starts hitting him with the God word. And Bill says, I was aghast. incredible word. I was aghast. My friend had found religion. He was like, oh, here we go again. The finger wagging, the God business. And Ebby drops it on him. Saved all of our lives in this room. Bill, why don't you choose your own conception? So what my sponsor said was, this happened to work for the founder of our fellowship. This might work for you. Let's find a conception. And not about figuring out God. I want to be very clear about that, right? Somewhere in that chapter, We Agnostics says we will never fully comprehend that which is God, and I believe that, right? As our friend Bob B says, he believes that God made us in his image and likeness, and he made the mistake of returning the favor. In other words, giving God these earthly qualities. I'll never fully comprehend which is God, except hopefully after I die. And so this isn't about figuring God out. But what I'm getting at and tying back to relationship, I need to have a relationship with God as opposed to a belief system. Because a belief system, to me at least, was one way. It's just the way it was. It was, did good, you got good type of deal. But a relationship was back and forth. It was going to grow. It was going to evolve. I could access that power. And what he said to me was, I want you to come up with 5 or 6 one-word characteristics that God needs to have if you're going to turn your will and your life over to him, right? Let's start this process of coming to know God, right? Stop being an agnostic. Let's get on this path of being a Gnostic. Let's gain some knowledge of God, some understanding, some limited understanding, some human understanding, not figuring it out. So what are some one-word characteristics that God needs to have? And, he sent me on my way. He said, read We Agnostics, read whatever you want. Come up with some one-word characteristics. And I came up with, what I needed God to be. Because the third step is the new contract, right? This is the deal, God. All my chips are in. I'm done. You're going to run the show, right? That's the third step. But the second step to me are the details of the contract, the prerequisites, the terms of the deal. And because I'm not going to turn my will and my life over to and kind of working this backwards, I'm not going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God if God's keeping score. If God's keeping score, I am in big, big trouble. And it's just even ignorant for me to think of that, because if God was keeping score, I'd be done. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be sober. By any stretch, I wouldn't be sober. I wouldn't be able to lay my head down at night with some relative peace. I wouldn't have the people in my life who tell me they love me, who I know they love me, who actually love me, not feeling, but they love me, if God was keeping score. And we talked about these one-word characteristics, and they weren't for him, they were for me. Because what that did was that started that relationship. And the words I came up with, I'll go real quickly, was all loving, right? I couldn't believe in a God that discounted other people, right? Makes sense. All powerful. If God was going to fix the mess that I made, he had to be powerful, because I made a mess. And I make more messes. He had to be forgiving. He had a sense of humor. And one of the words that I've added recently is perfect. But he stopped me on that forgiving thing. And he said, I get that. I need to be forgiven too. But for me, forgiveness was always, in my belief system, was something that was earned. It was merit-based. If I was good enough long enough, I'd be forgiven. If I didn't gamble for 90 days, I'd be forgiven. If I didn't drop the F-bomb for 90 days, I'd be forgiven. If I, whatever it was, and what he suggested to me changed my life forever. And it may not mean anything to you guys, but it really changed me forever. He said, John, I want you to consider that God is eager to forgive you. And that was much different than forgiving. Because as I said, in my mind at least, my little pea-brain mind, one was earned, merit-based, and this eager to forgive was a big deal. And the book says that, right? The book says that God does not make hard terms on those who seek him. That sounds like God is eager to forgive me. And why would God perhaps be eager to forgive me? Not because I'm a superstar, but because he needs me to perform his work, like it talks about, right? God has never spoken to me directly. God speaks to me in 90 degrees. God speaks through Will to me, through Cliff to me, 90 degrees. And so it's my job to be one of the conduits, to expand my bandwidth, to do this work, to get that bandwidth bigger so God can flow through me at a greater pace to help his fellows. And that really was just incredible to me. And that's what I ask my guys to do. Because it's just starting out this relationship. And we're going to act as if these characteristics are true. We're not going to fake it till we make it. Right? That doesn't do anybody any good. I did that for a long time. Faking things doesn't work. But let's just act as if these characteristics are true. And he said, if you find that one of these characteristics are true, let's talk about it and we'll throw it out. I'm still looking for that to happen. And it's just like forming a relationship with a new girlfriend, a new boyfriend. It's the same thing, right? You meet this girl, you're like, oh, that's pretty good. Right? She shows a little interest in you. You assign her some qualities and you hope they're true. You hope she's honest. You hope she's trustworthy. You hope she's not disloyal. You hope she's not, hoeing around on you, right? You hope she's got your best interest at heart. You're hoping these things are true. And you just act as if they're true until she shows otherwise. And if she doesn't show otherwise, after a while, that relationship gets strong. And that same exact thing happened with God in my life. And that's what I ask, my guys to do. This coming up with this conception is not about 2,000 years ago. No. That's not what we're after here. Let's just start this relationship with God. So we can just get, as they talk about, one of the things that I learned recently, I like to pass on, we say that the mustard seed of faith, begins then. I learned from this guy that the real meaning of that word mustard seed of faith, we assigned to that, just a little bit of faith, right? A little tiny mustard seed, because a mustard seed is tiny. So we think that means just a little bit of faith. Well, there was this guy called Pliny the Elder who was kind of the Encyclopedia Britannica of biblical times. He was the guy. He was the Google back then. And he wrote books about all of God's creations and plants and animals and stuff. And how he defined a mustard seed was much different than just tiny. Tiny was irrelevant. A mustard seed, one, had healing properties. That's a different type of faith, right, than just a tiny faith, a healing faith. And it spread like wildfire in your garden, like bamboo. That's a much better mustard seed of faith, one that's got healing properties and one that spreads like wildfire. So I wanted to share that with you because it's one of the things I learned recently, and I love it. And we've got about 15 minutes left to do 3.
I hadn't heard you say that yet. That's pretty cool. The second step for me, I just have to say, I've sponsored Buddhist. I've been sponsored by, Jewish women. A woman sponsored me for 5 years, and I love that, I talked about the great leveler, it's been so true in my life, I don't have to wait for the Catholic girls to walk through the door. I've done a third step in front of some Buddha statue, and it was just as powerful. Because God started to present himself to her. I guess Buddha, I don't know if Buddha has a gender or not, but her God had started to present, and I've gotten to watch that. And my job is to take my prejudice out of it. And, I had this one girl had a branch for a while. And the branch, was at the rehab center. She was in a halfway house, and she'd pray and meditate out back. And there was this big, beautiful tree, and the tree would blow certain ways. And, she felt like if the branch went this way, it was yes, and this way, no. And I said, hey, on her first year anniversary, I took my camera and I took a photo of the branch and blew it up and gave it to her. And, I can promise you 10 years later, she has a different experience with her higher power, but that's where it started. A woman, we went through the steps in my basement, a group of us, and, hers was, nature and sunrise and sunset and all that. And she, through the process of the steps, we're sharing about, we got to this part, between 2 and 3, I believe they're so tied together. I think, we rushed to 3 to say, oh, my third step's lacking, when really we need to look at the second step. God needed to get a little bit bigger, And so how that works, is, she had this sunrise and sunset. And I said, well, you know what? The good news is, guess who made all that? because I can't make the sunrise and sunset. And she had her awakening, and she now, has a different understanding, and she's been able to understand that, the third step to me was a cop-out for a while. And I think that's why I always go back to 2. If I feeling like it's a third step problem, I probably is an indicator to go back and make God a little bit bigger and give him a little more trust and give him a little more power. And then 3, takes on a new meaning. But it was a cop-out. Well, I'll let God handle it. Or I'm doing, I wasn't doing for myself what God could do for me, he was asking me at whatever was going on in my life to do, bring my shovel. He was going to move the mountain, but I needed to bring the shovel. And, but I could cop out at the third step and say, I'm going to let God handle it. I'm going to let God handle it. And you rest on your laurels, right? Well, it ties in for me is that, I had the proof already that I had the insanity part of, that's where I thought I was headed, to the psych ward. That's why I like to go to psych wards to take meetings. But, the third step for me was when they talked about the whirling dervish. We talk let me back up. It's the first requirement. Once we get to the third step, this is on page 60. The first requirement, okay, what do we mean by this? They said, step 3, when we're going to turn our will over. What do we mean by that? Because they say, how do you turn it over? How many sponsees say, how do you do that? How do you do that? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Well, it was not hard for me to see that. I talked about that last night. I picked a husband. I picked this life I thought I was going to have. And I'm telling you, I'd never been such in a dark, empty, awful place. I saw what that got me. And I watch it in people's lives, and I watched it in sobriety, and it's like, that whirling dervish starts to happen. I start creating confusion rather than harmony. We don't have to wait till the 11th step to start seeing some of this in our life. I found that, I was the whirling dervish in a lot of people's lives, and, that self-seeking and trying to make things a certain way. And I might have had a good, I used to say, I'm just a type A, and I hid behind that. I wanted the Legos in the Lego box and the Lincoln Logs in the, and I thought I was just being a great organized mom, and I wouldn't buy the kids a toy unless it had a container to put it in, so everything could stay. And I'd lay in bed at night going, oh my God, did it get in the Lego container? And I'd say, do not get up out of this bed. You can wait until the morning, and things like that. And it really was just adding like this, delusional thing that I had some kind of power over if I made certain things a certain way that I'd be okay. And, and so it was all part of this third step. And one of the things we've started doing recently is that, I've done this third step. You can sit on your knees and you can say a prayer, and you can find a beautiful place to do this. And it can be very powerful. But when am I doing it in my life? When am I, jumping off that cliff backwards with my eyes shut? When am I putting that resume out there and trusting God a little bit more? And sometimes it's so powerful, it happens so fast that it just, God asked me to do one simple little thing, and he starts moving stuff around, blows my socks off. My girls and I call each other all the time. You want to hear my God story? Do you want to hear what he did now? I mean, he's still in awe. I don't know why I'm still surprised all the time. But for me, it's like that. This is that part where I just might have to just take that leap of faith and let him and do that. And it's my whole life. It's not just my sobriety. I remember when I started learning that, we want our will and you start to try to define what will is and how do I know what my will is, and you get caught up in all that. And, it's just very easy for me to inventory. It's like, if I look around at the circumstances I'm in at the time, am I creating mess, or am I, offering a place of peace and understanding and kindness? And I can inventory how I'm working a third step in my life, just really simple. Are the kids all walking around pissed off and, am I making their life harder, or, are they coming to me for guidance and understanding? And am I a safe place for people to ask questions? Am I being a good listener? Those are like the practical part of this third step for me. Because it was just too deep, the other stuff in the beginning, and I just wanted to keep on trying and let, someone else show me how to act. I didn't know how. I was removing all this stuff. I wasn't acting the old ways I was acting, but then how am I going to act now, and that's where I had to start trusting that God was going to put the people in my life to teach me. So my job was to start looking for them, and that's how I learned how to stop trying to manage my own life. I started trying to do it a different way. And I think that, making the decision, you get caught up in the same thing. You get the dictionary out, you start looking up words, and it was like, I needed to know a practical way. I needed you to show me. So we get on our knees now, and I usually take a girl and I get a couple other girls, and we do it together as a group. And we each share a little bit, and we lift prayers up for that girl, and we talk about what we're going on in our life. And it's been an amazing experience, because it does say, you can do this with other people, not just one person. Doing it with my husband, brings God into our relationship, and we'll talk more about that later. But, I'm going to understand him different tomorrow than I do today. And just keeping my mind open to that it is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. It's not, my job is to make it, not put him in a box. For a while, we gave people God boxes on their anniversary, and you could put a little note and put it in the box. And, hey, I had it. It was great. There was piles of stuff in there, but as I started to really want to have a more working relationship, like a best friend type of relationship with God, having him with me, in me all day long, I didn't want to picture a box anymore. I didn't want to keep him in there, because, my relationship with him can just keep getting bigger and bigger. I think that the victim part and the self-seeking part that our book talks about, I really felt that once I handed in that victim card, that relationship and trust in him to handle my life was more. I knew that everything, was bigger than what my little pea brain could imagine. I was going to limit how God could work in my life if I kept trying to understand it. And it just was from my experience. It's like, if I want to, he is so huge and constantly getting bigger that I'm gonna cheat myself out of being able to do that. It says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. That says on 62, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I know it gets in. It's just. We talk about that once we get into the fourth step, but here it is in the third step. That is how I'm running my life, and trying to my perception of what's going on is tied up in that, and I can't see the real deal. I have a disease of perception. That 90% of my phone calls to my sponsor is my thinking, clear thinking? Is it sober thinking, or am I, disease of perception? I believe that, to this day, that even not drinking, working a strong program, having a relationship with God, trusting God more and more as I live my life, I still have a disease that wants to sabotage that and make that fear come back. And I can't live in that, or else I'm getting spiritually sick. The thing about the self-sacrificing that they talk about, something shifted when I started to realize that I was thinking of others with nothing attached. I was thinking of others 2 days after I had met somebody, wondering what was going on in their life. And the beautiful part of that is that it was replacing the thoughts of fear, self-pity, self-delusion, that I can get out of myself, I can help others, and God can take care of my stuff. And that's where the freedom started to happen. I was free from those demons. I call them demons. I call them, words that are pretty, but that's the stuff that haunted me, that kept me cut off from you, which was keeping me from God. And so, if I can keep that stuff open, you know, I want to be that producer of you know, I don't want to be the producer of confusion. I want to be that person. So, you know, we don't have to wait till the 11th step to get there. You know, I'm going to give him that job. You know, there's something that your gut, your heart, and your head, you know, I started that process in the 3rd step. You know, that sixth sense, that thing that happens, you know, when they all line up, man, magical things can happen. You know, I know my 3rd step, I think about this a lot, you know, that, you know, I have a physical reaction. My stomach hurts when I'm going against what I know God intends for me to do. So I don't have to define it. I have a physical reaction, you know, and if I'm really honest and I'm plugged into a power greater than myself, I don't have to worry about what I think God's will is. My stomach starts to hurt. And, you know, and I can choose to make the wrong decision, and I do. And I pay those spiritual price tags, you know, and it takes me a while to you know, look at how I can use that with me and have it change me. And, you know, that's good because it keeps those times in between when I go against my gut longer and longer and longer, thank goodness. You know, and I don't do it as much because I don't want to pay those price tags. So is that it? You want me to stop?
I don't want you to stop, but the CD is going to run out in a second.
There you go.
And I want to have the last word. So, I think it's important at this part of the work, you know, when at the middle of 62 that Renee was talking about. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. That's the essence of the 3rd step. Are yours, like ownership of my life to that point. Is this smoldering pile of rubble of my life? Is this basically my fault? Do I own, not even really fault, but do I own it today? More importantly, right? Do I own my life the way that it is today? So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back and get into the 4th step. Thanks a lot. See you in 10 minutes.